Divide et Impera adds a couple of factions to Rome too. One of these factions is Rhodes, and while they aren't a particularly strong faction, they do offer a charming playthrough which makes you feel like you're commanding a classical Greek army, as well as a unique start position. So let's go check out the start position and learn why Rhodes could be an interesting faction for you to play as. So here's the start position that Rhodes has, and you see, it's unique because you're on an island. Now, technically, there are other factions where you do start out on an island. Like, for example, if you're the Syracusans, you'll start on Sicily, which kind of acts more as a peninsula than an island. Or, obviously, the British factions, they also start on an island. But Rhodes is unique because you start on a very small island, like this. Meaning that you kind of can turtle up and make sort of like an impromptu Rhodian fortress, if you wish. However, you can also kind of raid the coast at will and play almost like as pirates from the very beginning. So this island start position does give you a little bit of an interesting dynamic to the beginning of your campaign. Simultaneously, your province is rather Hellenic in culture, so you won't struggle with public order from the very onset. You can see it's only a -4, which is pretty good for turn 1. So that's good for you, and it'll give you the freedom to go and attack wherever you please without having to be worried about taking your army out. Now, the thing is that you start out the campaign with pretty much no diplomatic treaties, with the exception of a non-aggression pact with the Pergamese. However, from my experience, they will not stick to this. In fact, basically everybody might attack you sheerly because they see you as a weakling. They see you as a weak link. So it might be prudent for you for the very beginning of the campaign to just try to get trade agreements with as many people as you can. But also, from what I've seen from my attempts before, is that only the Ptolemies and the Athenians will really want a trade agreement, probably because they don't see you as a potential enemy. The Lydians and the Cretans, or Knossos as they're called in this game, they probably won't want trade agreements with you from the very beginning because they see you as a threat. So it's really going to be one of these two that are going to be your initial enemy, and it's really up to you to choose which way you want to expand. Like, this is a campaign defining decision, because ultimately if you take Crete, you're probably going to expand westward and take the rest of Hellas. Like, you're going to send ships towards Sparta, try to take Sparta next, and then go to Athens. But of course, if you take on the Lydians, then you're probably going to try to unify all of Asia under your control by taking on Pergamon and of course the Lydians, which it will put you at war with the Seleucids, but the Seleucids are so far away and they're gonna have their hands full here, so you don't really need to worry about the Seleucids marching an army to attack you. It's very unlikely that they will. So don't consider the Lydians as too much of a threat. I would attack them if you want to. Now, when it does come to Rhodes' early army, it is admittedly quite limited in scope. And that's really the main challenge of this campaign. Like, the start position is pretty useful, but the army that you have to use is sort of outdated. Like I mentioned in the introduction, it's like a classical Greek army, like a Peloponnesian War era Greek army, so it lacks the bells and whistles of a Hellenistic army, the type that, say, the Pergamese would use. So if you want to kind of see specifically what that entails, you can see here in your turn 1 recruitment that you basically only have citizen cavalry, crappy Greek javelin cavalry, you have basic hoplites, you have levy hoplites, you have crappy Greek infantry that are more like skirmishers and actual infantry, and then of course you have your skirmishers. So there's basically no particularly good melee infantry that you can recruit here, and most of your most of your army is going to be hoplite based. Now, because you are the Rhodians, you do have some interesting slinger options, and you really get to choose between these two, and they both are interesting in their own right. These Rhodian slingers, they are 100% slinger base. Like, their melee stats are really nothing interesting. They won't do much in melee. However, they have an insane 13 missile damage, which means that their slingshots do almost as much damage as arrows, which is unheard of considering that slingers fire faster and they have 24 ammunition. So these guys will fire the whole battle. So as long as you can stretch out the battle, allow your hoplites to resist the enemy and just be that solid, bulky shield wall that hoplites are, these slingers will do immense damage. You also have this very unique unit, but I digress. I'll go into that when we check out the roster and go into more detail. But essentially, when it comes to Rhodes, what your first decision is either to attack the Cretans or to attack the Lydians. Those are really your two most possible, most logical ways to expand. And also, the other thing is that the Rhodians have access to a pretty insane navy from turn 1, and they generally do have some really solid naval units. Like, this ship has 2,000 health, but you do get a very powerful Greek navy. And as you can see, there's a lot of ships that you can recruit from turn 1, some of reasonably high health, as well as some pretty solid skirmish capacities with these Rhodian slingers on ships. So I would really recommend that you develop a little bit of a navy, grind out your army to its full capacity, and then maybe take on the Cretans or take on these guys. Really just depends on which way you want to expand. The other thing is that while on turn 1 you won't have a lot of options, Asia as a province does have some great mercenary options, like these Phrygian spearmen right here. They're really good. Tarentine cavalry, very good. A unit just innately, everyone knows they are. You also have a pike phalanx unit that you can recruit here, and I highly recommend you get some of these to help balance out the weaknesses of your hoplites and take on enemy pikes as well as hoplites. So yeah, I would definitely recommend that you look at mercenary recruitment constantly to try to scoop up some of the better mercenaries. And now for your army, because Rhodes does have a very solid citizen population from turn 1, you have 3,000 citizens and 1,000 elites from turn 1, you will be able to get a full army of slingers and hoplites. Really anything amongst here, you'll be able to get a full army of it. It'll deplete your city, sure, but what this does ensure is that you're able to have the best army that you can to solidify your initial conquests. And yeah, just put them on ships and take them where you want to do. It's not a very hard campaign to navigate diplomatically. You're just going to have to win battles with a somewhat outdated army. Speaking of outdated army, let's go check out both the army and, of course, the faction buffs that you get as Rhodes. So let's quickly go over to faction buffs before we get right into the army. As you can see, all these Hellenic factions, they get these two buffs: Greek knowledge, +5 research rate, as well as classical heritage, which gives you +2 to cultural conversion. Now, when it comes to these two, they aren't particularly good buffs. I went over this with Sparta as well, but these are some of the weaker buffs in the game. They're kind of like nice quality of life things, like, you know, a little bit of research rate's good, a little bit of cultural conversion is good just to help balance out negative public order as a consequence of foreign cultures, but ultimately these aren't game-changing. It won't really help you that much. We're just subtle little buffs that'll help you a little bit. Now, what you do get, which is kind of nice, is increased reload for Rhodian slingers. That just makes the Rhodian slingers even more powerful, and it ensures that your Rhodians are stronger than any mercenaries recruited by enemies, and it's just a general nice thing to have. You want your slingers to expend all their ammo every battle, and because they have so much ammunition, that increased reload speed will just help them be more like ancient machine guns rather than, you know, something more pacey, something more bulky. Now, this debuff does really suck. Increased non-mercenary costs. It basically means that your entire army will be more expensive to afford, and this stays with you the entire campaign. So it is kind of a negative. It does constrain your military expansion somewhat. However, there's nothing that you can do about it. It's just one of things you have to deal with when you're playing as Rhodes, and Rhodes has the capacity to create a very strong economy with your Greek building chains, so you can definitely offset this by just being smart in managing your economy, but it is still a nuisance without a doubt. Now, increased ship movement in campaign and battle, that's also kind of nice. And like I mentioned, the Rhodians, as you are an island nation, as you do have a strong Greek navy, it is probably good and intelligent for you to develop a solid navy for your campaign, and this buff just incentivizes this somewhat more. You of course don't have the heaviest ships in the game though. That particular pleasure will go to factions like the Ptolemies and the Carthaginians and stuff like that. So when it comes to this increased ship movement, it'll help your smaller ships that contain Rhodian slingers, so very deadly ships, however, just small. It'll help them be more maneuverable. So if you are good at naval battles, you're going to be able to capitalize on them a lot with this buff. But anyway, now let's go and check out the army. And this is where Rhodes suffers. Now, if you look at this through a positive lens, you can see that this is a rather charming army because, again, it maintains the character of like a classical Greek army from ancient antiquity, right? We're not talking about like Macedonian-inspired armies. Like this is the old style of conducting warfare that the Greeks were famous for, at least until you hit the Thorax reforms. Now, if you look at this through a negative perspective, this roster is incredibly constrained. It lacks elite units that are going to be capable of helping you win the campaign and endgame. And in general, it's not a very strong roster either. But let's just go over it before I judge it too heavily. Now, for your general, you have 5 distinct options. They are admittedly all options that you can just recruit in your regular armies. There is nothing particularly unique about any of these general options. I don't know. Like, when it comes to picking through these units, the only real options are basically these Thorax Spearmen, once you can unlock them. These Rhodian Picked Hoplites, which are pretty much a generic Picked Hoplite. Like, they are good Elite Hoplite, don't get me wrong, but there's nothing extremely special about these. There's so many factions that have hoplites with equivalent stats. Almost every Hellenized faction does. And then Heavy Lancers, which are a pretty mid-tier elite Lancer cavalry. Like, there's nothing special about this particular Lancer, to be honest with you. Like, they have the stats of a lot of early game companion-style cavalry. This is basically the only Macedonian-inspired unit in this roster. But yeah, if I was going to go for anything, I'd probably just pick the Lancer, since you're not going to have a lot of elite cavalry in a Rhodian army. And of course, this allows you to quickly get your general out of a tricky situation if you need to. But of course, if you're making a more defensive-based army, a Picked Hoplite might be a great option, because at least these guys can sit in a choke point and help you defend a settlement. So that's kind of a decision here, but when it comes to these like Dorian Freyo Spears and these Rhodian Hoplites, like these are just weaker options if you want to save money, I suppose. But I don't know why you'd want to save money on your general bodyguard. That's kind of something that might hurt you in the future, you know? Now, when it comes to melee infantry, you have 3 options, one for each reform level in the game. You of course have the Greek infantry. Nothing special here. These are garbage units. The only positive thing is that they have 4 speed and 3 ammunition, so they throw 3 javelins. Of course, 225 men also makes them good. Their melee stats aren't horrible innately. 8 melee attack and 11 melee defense is better than some barbarian swordsmen in early game. However, 33 base morale is terrible. 8 armor is terrible. These guys tend to run once you start killing them very easily. You might want to have a couple of these in your backline just for flank charges and to throw over javelins, as well as maybe if you're running low on money, you can recruit them. But they're really not good, nothing special. Freyo Swordsmen, absolutely nothing special about these. They are an upgrade on these guys, but only slight. The morale is still bad, the armor is the same. They do have better melee stats, but 13 charge bonus is horrible for a swordsman. So ultimately, these guys are just an upgraded version of the Greek infantry, and I can't really call them anything better than that. Once you get Thorax reforms, you get generic Thorax swordsmen. These guys, they are a completely average late game sword unit. They have better morale than these two. They have 38 armor, which is solid, but in late game, absolutely nothing special. 14 melee attack and 11 melee defense is extremely average stats, and the 16 charge bonus is wherever constrained. That's pretty bad charge bonus, to be honest. These are just generic sword, Thorax swords, guys. Every single Hellenic faction basically gets a version of this. And these guys are the most generic version of any of those versions. So, really nothing special here, but it's nice that at least you do get a late game sword as the Rhodians. But at the end of the day, these guys are not going to help you overwhelm an enemy unless they just don't have an equivalent to a Thorax sword, really. Now, when it comes to your spear infantry, you have your generic Freyo Spears. These guys are generic Freyo Spears. Again, such a ubiquitous unit, I don't feel like I should spend very much time trying to explain it. They can be a decent mainline once you get the Freos reforms, because your hoplites are going to recruit from your upper classes, and these guys come from your population free class, the commoner class. So you can make a mainline out of these if you're running out of more elite citizens to recruit. But unlike hoplites, they're not going to do nearly as well in the choke point. They don't have a formation attack, so in combat, they might get cut through by a better opponent, but against Hellenistic opponents or Eastern opponents, these guys are going to be more than sufficient. So you can use them. But the thing is that the Rhodians get access to a far better option for a Freo Spear. We get the Dorian Freo Spear. Now, okay, maybe I'm hyping them up by saying that they're much better. They actually have equivalent stats to regular Freo Spear, but the Dorians do get 30 more armor. They also have the Discipline trait, which means that they don't suffer a morale penalty when the general dies. They also come back from routing more often. So these guys are just better than the regular Freo Spears in every, well, actually not in every way. I was about to say in every way, but I literally just explained it. They have more armor and they're more resilient because they're disciplined. Unless you're running low on money, I would just get a Dorian Spear line if you can, really. If it's 4x Spearman, just your generic 4x Spear. It is a very solid unit, don't get me wrong. It's just basically every Greek faction has access to it, so this won't make him unique. But these guys are incredibly stable and resilient. If you need a late game line, but you don't want to have hoplites, because hoplites are just a little bit inflexible, get Freo Spears. They'll do the trick for you. Now, when it comes to Phalanx Infantry, the Rhodians have incredibly average options. Like, there's just nothing special about these units. They just have a unique appearance because it's Rhodes. You know, I do like what the Divide et Impera team, or Divide et Impera team, I do like how they made unique decals or unique models for basically every faction's elite hoplites. But obviously, it would be a little bit disingenuous to give them unique stats. Like, the nobility of almost every Greek kingdom or faction would fight in a virtually identical way, and why would you give one higher stats than the other unless, you know, if we're just like the elites of the Seleucids, like some sort of incredibly imperialist and elite faction. So when it comes to the Rhodians, these guys are average. You have Levy hoplites, you have Rhodian Pict hoplites, and you have Rhodian hoplites. The Pict hoplites are locked behind the third tier barrack, so it might take you a while to actually be able to recruit these guys, but you can recruit Rhodian hoplites and Levy hoplites from turn 1. There's absolutely nothing special about these guys. At the same stats as Epirote hoplites, Macedonian hoplites, Seleucid hoplites, Athenian hoplites, etc., right? They are generic hoplites. But generic hoplites are good, and you're probably going to go up against a lot of Hellenic factions from the very onset, so we're going to be going up against, you know, similar hoplites for both factions. Now, your missile infantry is where you have your unique troops, although, to be fair, like 5 out of 7 of your options are not unique at all. You have your generic Greek javelin men, generic Greek archers, generic Greek slingers. If you use these guys when you're Rhodes, generic Greek slingers, by the way, it just means you're a psychopath. Why would you? And then you have early Peltus and late Peltus. I'm not really going to go over these guys because there's like 20 factions that have these units identically, although this is the old unit card for Peltus. A lot of factions that have gotten more love have a cooler looking unit card for Peltus. But two unique options for the Rhodians are the Rhodian Slinger and the Rhodian Light Hoplite. Now, the Rhodian Slinger is really good because it has 215 range, which is basically max range for a missile unit in Divide et Impera. So these guys will have an amazing range, which means that you can kind of keep them out of harm's way. You can entice your opponent to rush you in virtually any battle. Like, if you're using the Rhodians, you'd better have a missile advantage going into almost any battle. It would be really weird if you didn't. And considering that your troops are a lot more defensive in nature, like, you're probably going to have a Hoplite Corps, and then maybe some Freo Spears on the flanks, or maybe some Furrow Swords on the flank. Like, you're not going to have the type of units that do shock damage on the charge, right? You're going to be a very defensive faction. So it's really good that you have a range advantage over virtually any opponent. And then 13 missile damage is really elite for a Slinger. That's like getting near Archer amounts of damage, but of course Slingers reload faster, they have more ammunition, they do more armor-piercing damage. So these Rhodian Slingers are absolute killers, and they will do great damage. The only negative that these guys have is they only have 1 armor, which is really bad. So once a more, like, we could say heavily armored archer closes the gap and these Rhodians have maybe shot it twice, the heavier archer could actually probably beat these guys in a shoot-off, because with 1 armor, these guys are going to die really quickly. Now, the Rhodian Light Hoplite is a pretty unique and interesting unit. These guys, they aren't as good at slinging, but they are a Slinger Light Hoplite hybrid. So these guys will actually be a very interesting and charming unit in early game, although as you can see, they are very expensive. They're more expensive than a Rhodian hoplite. But let me explain. So these guys are a slinger but has 190 range and 11 missile damage, which is the same as your Greek slinger. So these guys do as much damage as a regular slinger. They do have less ammunition. They only have 8 ammunition compared to Greek Slinger's 20, and they shoot slower. They only shoot 4 shots per minute. But that also means within 2 minutes, these guys will have expended their ammo, and then they go into combat with 8 melee attack, 15 melee defense, and a charge bonus of 19, a weapon damage of 22. These guys are basically a decent early game spear unit. But I'm going to say, I have to qualify this and say that they're very much an early game unit because they only have 10 armor. These guys would get slaughtered by anything with armor and good stats. But you know what? Like, these guys are absolutely great at holding flanks in early game. They can definitely deal good damage on a flank charge as well. These guys are an absolutely wonderful bit of flexibility that the Rhodians have, and these guys will really help you in a cavalry fight as well. These guys will go right in and help resolve it really easy. These guys are kind of like the Spartan youth, except they have slings. So use them. These guys are a very unique and interesting and charming unit to use as the Rhodians. Now moving on to your cavalry, you don't really have many great options. Like, you have regular Tarentine cavalry and Rhodian citizens. You just have to figure out which one of these that you want. The Tarentines do have more men, although they have slightly worse combat stats and they have less armor as well. I would personally just go for the Tarentines if I were you, because 4 ammunition can be quite useful, and 90 men is way better than 75, and the armor difference between these guys is only 5, so I would definitely go for Tarentines if you can recruit them. Heavy Lancers are great, obviously. Hammer and Anvil with Lancer Cavalry, and these Hoplites will be quite good, but literally, these are just generic cavalry options that most Greek factions have, guys. You have your basic melee cav, your basic shock cav, and then a Tarentine cavalry, which everyone has. So nothing special, and then literally when it comes to your missile cav, just nothing to talk about. These guys are horrible. For Greek javelin cav, don't use them. And Freya's cavalry is a little bit better, but these guys suck at melee. So if you get charged by any melee cavalry, they're going to get absolutely destroyed. So I wouldn't really use these guys, but if you want to throw some javelins, it's up to you. Maybe that's part of your playstyle. But most of your skirmishing should be done with slingers. I don't know why you'd bring missile cavalry into the fray if you're the Rhodians. But anyway, guys, that's the roster. It's very limited. It's very primitive. You will get absolutely wrecked by any powerhouse faction in battle unless you just absolutely outplay them. And for that reason, I won't judge Rhodians to be a very powerful faction. In terms of land battles, I'd say that that they're really not a powerful faction. They're like a 2 out of 10, but they're fun to use if you want to kind of feel like you're bringing an outdated army to the fight. You know, it's bringing a knife to a gunfight, metaphorically. Now, when it comes to whether you should play this campaign or not, I'd give it like a 2 out of 10 again. Like, we're charming to play for like 10 turns, but I couldn't imagine playing a full campaign with these guys. Yeah, you're going to be really heavily dependent on like AOR units and stuff to make the campaign fun to play, because this is like such a small army, and they're not really all that hype like, say, the Spartans or anything like that. But ultimately, it is a cool start position. I'd recommend just playing a couple of turns to see if you like it. I actually did like it. Fighting against Crete was a lot of fun. Felt like a, you know, like a Peloponnesian era battle, but ultimately I wouldn't really play like the long haul on this campaign. But that's it for the Rhodians, guys. Stay tuned for more guides, and thank you for watching. Like and subscribe. Bye for now.